Hello, welcome back. In the last video, we talked about federalism and how a system of federalism operates within this country, or at least the idea of federalism, that's power is shared between the national government and the subnational governments, or state and local governments. And so that's very important to talk about this idea, what the idea behind federalism was, right? Because the framers knew that the national government, as we discussed before, the national government needed some authority, but it was really important to the colonists to have a certain amount of power still vested in the states. And we call those reserve powers, right? We see that in the 10th Amendment. But what I'm going to talk about now is, right, not just the theory or the design of federalism within the Constitution, but the actual application of federalism throughout history, right? And so we think about this idea that the utilization of the 10th Amendment, right? Because the powers just don't exist, right? You do have the power, the national government asserting authority on a variety of things, and the state government asserting authority on a variety of things. But because of external forces, other political circumstances, the utilization, right, the state's willingness to assert their reserve powers, to utilize the 10th Amendment, has waxed and waned throughout history. And we're going to talk about why that is, right? There's a few main reasons that does happen, why the power shifts from the states to the national government and back from the national government to the state governments, okay? So one of those ways is through judicial decisions, right? When there's actual cases and controversies, we see the courts making decisions about who has the power to make certain decisions. Is it the national government, the state government? So based on how those decisions come about, right, that power shifts. And we saw that in McCulloch versus Maryland, as the United States government set up a banking system, right, under, as they use the necessary and proper clause, under the ability to tax and borrow. The court said, yes, well, that is a necessary and proper action of federal government to carry out their express powers. So when the courts do that, when they recognize the government's ability to exercise authority under the necessary and proper clause, remember, elastic, they're stretching and expanding the power of the national government. And when that power is expanded, it retracts for the state government, for state governments, right? So we saw that in McCulloch versus Maryland, Gibbons v. Ogden, when the courts expanded the definition of interstate commerce to just to include just the moving of people by ferries, right? So it wasn't just the movement of goods and services, transportation, all that, of those goods and services. It was just the movement of people. So they were expanding the definition of what interstate commerce was. And when you expand that definition, again, you're expanding the role of the federal government, expanding the national government's power at the expense of the state government, right? But throughout this history, right, when these decisions are made, right, especially when the country was in its infancy, right, there were states that weren't happy about these decisions, and they saw their fears of a strong central government becoming a reality. They saw this power shifting from the state governments to the federal government, and that raised some concerns. So for a variety of different reasons, that power being centralized, the fear of slavery being abolished in the southern states, right? We ended up fighting this country ended up going through a civil war. And because of that, the recognition of this terrible war that the country fought during Reconstruction, right? Courts were less likely to cede power to the national government when they made their decisions. The courts tried to kind of understand why the Civil War came about and tried to recognize really the system, the power, the federal system, and try to understand where the power should be vested and try to keep that separation. So you had, coming out of the Civil War during Reconstruction, this recognition of that the state should have a continued degree of authority, right? So you kind of had the system of dual federalism, where the courts tried to really try to draw a line between where states' powers were and where the federal government power was, right? So you have these court decisions that cause the utilization of the 10th Amendment and the ability of the states to assert their reserve powers, right? Those powers ebb and flow based on court decisions, okay? So what else causes the that ebb and flow of the reserve powers to be asserted? Well, you have economic issues, right? Economic downturns. Think about the Great Depression, where you had substantial economic loss, and the states didn't have the capacity to take care of their citizens, right? So what did the states do? They looked to the federal government. FDR looked to expand and create a variety of programs, economic programs to help individuals, right? Expanding the government, this national government's power while the state government's power was shrinking. And why did that happen? Because the states weren't about to assert their reserve powers and say, no, we don't want your help, right? These states were hurting. These states were in trouble. They needed the national government's help. So it's important to understand that external forces affect whether or not states are willing to assert their 10th Amendment rights, okay? And as we've seen from time to time, most recently in Louisiana, Mississippi, in addition to economic downturns, we have natural disasters, right? States do their best to prepare for natural disasters, to protect their citizens, but that's not always possible to protect them in every way possible and also help them after a storm occurs, right? For cleanup, to help those areas rebuild and address health and safety concerns, right? So states look to the national government because they're able to pull money from all of the other states and be able to provide resources that one state or two states can't provide. So between court decisions, economic externalities, natural disasters, those are the main ways, right? These situations that occur that tell states, right, there's a time and a place to assert these reserve powers. So it's important to understand how politics and other situations impact the decision-making of states and the national government. So with that, if you have any questions, please reach out and have a great day.